Let's move on, though, Sean, into the real, kind of like how you said for the fast break, the real deal, the main reason for the podcast this week, continuing our previews through college football. And we're finishing out the SEC, and you roll your eyes a little bit there. It's a long one.
I like college basketball better.
It is.
So that's why I'm rolling my eyes.
Sean's like,
I like
gotta
having
go back to college football.
I like having Matt on. I like talking about college basketball. We're in the NBA draft season. That's all. I'm not bashing on SEC football.
Sooner rather than later, we'll be doing our college basketball previews during the football season. That will be fun. But what we're doing is we're going through every single SEC team. Last week, Brandon and I went through the West. This week, we're going through the East. How we start is we start with the bottom. We move all the way to the top. And then at the end, we kind of end up the show. So we will look at first the Tennessee Volunteers as a team. 0-8 last year. Or 0-8 in conference. 4-8 overall. Butch Jones, adios. You're out of here. You can't win a game. You don't deserve to be here. So that's where I want to ask you this. I know a month ago, Brandon and I talked about comments that new head coach Jeremy Pruitt had made after...
It's not John Gruden?
It's not John Gruden. Oh, okay. It was going to be John Gruden, but it's not John Gruden.
I thought Lane Kiffin was coming back.
It was going to be Lane Kiffin also. It was also going to be Greg Schiano, too.
Dang.
But Jeremy Pruitt is the guy coming over from Alabama. So here's the question I want to ask about Pruitt is... What do you expect from him year one? Because the question that Brandon and I talked about was, can he turn this team around because of the attitude it seems he's already trying to put in place in Knoxville?
It's going to be tough to see if he can turn it around just because we don't know what he can do as a head coach. But you look at his resume. I mean, he's been involved in college football since 1997. I mean, you look at what he's done recently, and really the thing that sticks out to me, you have powerhouses and then you have Hoover High School. And when you're the defensive back coach for Hoover High School in 2004, nothing beats that. But no, I mean, consistently being in the SEC since 2014, Georgia, he was DC and DB coach, and then Alabama recently as the DC and then inside linebacker coach. I mean, there's an expectation that this defense for the Vols, it was so bad last year, they couldn't stop the run, gave up over, I think, 33 points per game, can now at least make that shift to look like a competent SEC defense. Because the biggest thing with SEC football, it's smart, it's fast, it's strong, and you have to have a great defense if you want to win. You can give up 30 points and still win, but technically and typically you're grinding out these games. You're trying to keep the defense of the other team off the field. You want to waste time, you want to waste that clock and keep your offense fresh and try to tire out that defense. And I think that's the biggest thing for Jeremy Pruitt is just revamping this defense. If he's able to revamp this defense, get them to around like 26 points per game, bring down that rushing defense, and slow down the rushing offense for the opposing team, I think that's going to be the biggest thing for Pruitt. I don't really have a win marker. If they get to 6 or 5 wins, I think that's going to be a success for Pruitt. But as long as the defense sees a step up, I think at least the Tennessee Vols will be in the right direction because he still needs to get his own recruiting class in.
I mean, for me, there's two big, looking at the offense, because that's usually what I look at first, is really with Pruitt, what you said defensively, being a defensive coach, obviously you want that to be your bread and you want that to be really well because it's your bread and butter. But to me, there's two big questions for this team, and they're both on the offensive side. The first, I'll go with the smaller of the questions, is when you look at Pruitt and what he envisions for this offense, it's really a ground and pound where we're going to run the ball, we're going to smash you in the mouth with the run game, kind of like how Alabama does it, where I kind of, in a couple years, envision Pruitt building Tennessee in the image of Alabama, where it's just running backs coming in left and right, and it's like, oh, one left? It doesn't matter because we got these other 3 or 4 that are right here that you know their name. And for this year, it's a little bit different for Tennessee because John Kelly left. He was their leading rusher. He left the university because he just didn't want to be there anymore. So now the main guy up is Ty Chandler. He's the guy, only had 71 carries last year, just over 300 yards. He's your main guy right now. But on top of that, the bigger question, what are you going to do at quarterback? Because you've got 2 guys that have been there. You've got Will McBride. You've got Jared Garantano, who have been there. However, you've got an incoming freshman coming in, JT Shroud. You also have a graduate transfer from Stanford who is pretty respectable from Stanford in Keller Christ, who he was 11-2 as a starter in the pro-style offense for Stanford. I want to ask you, because for Ty Chandler, it's really, can he produce with a bigger role? Because he's probably obviously going to get more carries. Can that equal more yards for him? The biggest question is, what do they do at quarterback? Because I'm assuming it's Keller Christ, but you're not just going to hand him the job. He's going to have to earn it.
I think it's going to be Christ just because you look at him having experience, and I think that's the biggest thing for a new program is having an experienced quarterback. If you're throwing in a freshman quarterback with questions behind, at the line, at the offense, what it's going to look like, having a guy who's just been in situations, been in big moments, has gone against teams like USC, gone against Notre Dame. When he has the experience against those teams, against big programs, I think that's going to be the biggest thing for at least a new program. And he wasn't great, let's be honest. Keller Christ wasn't a great quarterback last year. 54.2% completion percentage, 8-4 touchdown to interception ratio, but he is going to manage the game at least. And I think that's going to be the biggest thing is he doesn't need to be spectacular, and typically SEC quarterbacks aren't. I mean, let's look at how many SEC quarterbacks have really exploded to be great NFL pros. The only one I could think of recently is Cam Newton, and Cam Newton's a next level athlete. I mean, we consistently look at guys in the SEC as game managers, the guys who can at least throw the ball 10 yards and try to get
A.J. McCarron type players.
A.J. McCarron, Danny Etling, those type of players. I think that's going to be the biggest thing. Obviously Georgia had a different level, but even then, you look at Alabama, like they don't have a great quarterback that's going to turn into a great NFL pro.
Tua might be that guy.
Outside, but it's one game.
I know. We've only seen one half, not even a game.
But you look at Jalen Hurts. I mean, Jalen Hurts typically did enough. I think the only thing for Christ is that he needs to do enough, and especially to start off the season. If he's not doing enough, you can take him out. But for the first couple of games, I think that's the biggest thing for this Tennessee team is just get them used to the style that Pruitt wants them to play, get them used to having a guy that knows how to deal with high-pressure situations. I think that's the biggest thing is Christ will be able to step in and has experience, has a great experience against under David Shaw, has great experience with Bryce Love before. So I think the biggest thing is just having a guy that can step in there and be cool, calm, and collected, and I think that's going to be Christ.
Well, and that's why for me, because I'm looking at this going, Christ is going to be the guy, because
I don't think he's going to be the guy for the whole season. Because he's not that good.
You don't think so?
No, I don't think he's that good.
The only reason I think he will is because I don't think any of the guys below him, I don't think that Shrout's going to get much of a chance because freshman coming in, I feel like he'll just be pushed to the bottom. I think it's going to be, if I'm going with the depth chart, I'd go with Christ to start, Garantano will be 2, McBride will be 3, Shrout will be 4. If Shrout moves up, he'll move up to 3. But I look at Jared Garantano and it's this is a guy that almost threw for 1,000 yards last year. Yeah, he completed about 62% of his passes, but he was a guy that was 4 touchdowns, 2 high. There was nothing special about him. He didn't have an it factor. Whereas with Keller Christ, the thing that I think is more important is, he wasn't good last year, but look at his 2016 year. And you might be saying, Ricky, that was 2 years ago.
And the guy got benched in 2017.
And it's not that okay, so 2017 he got benched, but 2016 is what I'm looking at. The reason why is that Stanford team was a lot more stacked than it was in 2017. So for Tennessee, it's more of if you want the quarterback to do it all, which I'm assuming Pruitt does not, then Christ might not be your guy. But if you can elevate a Ty Chandler, much because that 2016 year, I'm not saying Ty Chandler is going to be like this, but Keller Christ had Christian McCaffrey and Bryce Love in that backfield. So I'm not saying you're going to have that at Tennessee, but if you can elevate some talent to help out, he might have a pretty good year.
I think maybe not 3 games or 2 games, but I think Christ will most likely play against non-conference opponents, so West Virginia, ETSU, UTEP, and then once we hit probably that Georgia game, after they lose to Florida and Georgia, because that's what I expect, I think that they're going to look for a change in quarterback. And
so you're saying at Auburn?
Yeah, at Auburn, that's where Christ is most likely going to get benched. Because, again, I don't think he's that great of a quarterback. I think he's going to be a guy that just needs to get some stability right away into the program. I don't think he's going to be the guy that starts up. And I think you got to look at Will McBride. He's a guy that was a 3-star recruit coming out of high school, and he's a guy that's a dual-threat quarterback. And I think he's a guy that's going to be something interesting. And if you're able to throw him in different sets and he's able to do enough with his arm, he's got some nice speed, was able to rush for a couple yards last year. I think that he can be a guy that, again, he might not be the greatest quarterback, but again, we've seen this before in the SEC work, like Jalen Hurts. If you're quick enough, if you're dynamic enough, if you're able to pick up first downs, that's going to be the biggest thing. Will McBride might be able to do that for this Tennessee team. I think he's going to offer more in that area than Christ offers overall. So I think maybe Will McBride is a guy that also makes a name for himself because, yes, you look at obviously what Tennessee was able to do last year and Garantano was able to do last year. But I think McBride, being a freshman last year, now getting a second year in, as a sophomore, they might look at him, especially if he's able to do some damage in some different sets, especially early on in the games against UTEP and ETSU.
Well, and one of the last things I want to mention about the offense is no matter what quarterback is out there, the biggest thing coming back this season will be Jawan Jennings coming back because in 2016, huge Hail Mary catch against Georgia. Everyone remembers that, especially if you're in Knoxville. But last year, you might not remember Jennings if you're not a Tennessee fan because he was injured. He suffered a season-ending wrist injury last year. Didn't see him for every other game after that injury. So to me, it's will Jennings come back and be the main guy? Well, I'm assuming he'll come back, be the main guy, and can these other wide receivers like Callaway and Johnson fill in and be kind of a competent receiving core for whether it's Garantano, whether it's a Keller Kreis, whether it's a Shrout, if the freshman ever starts any games this year.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, though, again, is going back to this defense because that's where this is going to shine. This is where Pruitt's going to need to make his name. Again, if the offense sucks, the offense sucks. He hasn't been able to bring any recruits in. He hasn't been able to talk anybody to anybody yet. He hasn't been able to bring in his own guys. I'm not too worried about that, to be honest with you. I'm looking at this defense, though, because, again, he's been given talent before. He's been given talent at Georgia. He's been given talent at Alabama. Now he's got to take the talent that he has at Tennessee and put this into a defense that isn't, full of holes like paper can be. I think the biggest thing is it's going to be at least having a pretty decent secondary, having a playmaker, that linebacking core, which he does have this year in Darian Kirkland. I think the thing for Pruitt is as long as he's able to at least put out a very decent defense, a respectable defense, I think that's going to be the biggest win for the Vols this season because I think they can beat ETSU. I think they can beat UTEP. So there's 2 wins right there. Now you need to just find 4 more in that schedule to end up at that 6-win mark, which I think would be a healthy start for Jeremy Pruitt because I don't think this is going to be a 9-team like Butch Jones was able to get a couple of years ago. I don't think this is going to be national championship winners like they were able to get out of Peyton Manning. But I think this could be a team that at least gets a fairly decent amount of wins. And Pruitt, if he's able to put out a decent defense, can get those 6 wins.
Well, it'll be interesting. I'll throw in one more, and it's kind of masked because it's later in the year. I think they can beat Charlotte too. So it's 3 wins. You got Charlotte, Eastern Tennessee, and UTEP. The only question for me is, do they win an SEC game this year? Do they beat West Virginia on a neutral site? And with the defense, the thing I'm looking at, the thing I feel like is going to be the best this year for them is their front defensive line. Because although Pruitt moving over to a 3-4, it's going to be interesting. Because, if they were in their 4-3, you would have Tuttle and Johnson in the middle, and then you would have Phillips and Kongbo on the outside, which I believe Tennessee fans, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe Kongbo is moving to the outside. He was originally an interior defensive lineman. Now he's moving to the outside. The thing that I think will be interesting there is you have 4 guys, you move to 3 guys, and really that middle position of will it be better rather than having all 4 of them out there at once, rotating that middle to where the nose tackle in this is always the freshest guy, and they're just kind of rotating Johnson and Tuttle out there. So that to me is going to be the crucious thing because the most crucial thing because the thing that you'll have to do, what are you going up against with this division? You've got quarterbacks, and quarterbacks. You've got Felipe Franks will probably be the guy in Florida, Stidham, Tua. You've got quarterbacks in this division, especially in that 4-game stretch. How do you get them? Fluster them. Get after that quarterback.
Well, and I think one thing too is I think you're right about at least the rotating in, the fresh in the middle of the 3-4 because we saw that a lot at Alabama. I think Pruitt's going to bring that over. But it's really how talented are these guys enough to do that? How quickly are they going to pick this up? So I think that's the best part about the schedule for them is that they're starting off against West Virginia, where if they lose it, no one's really going to be too shocked because West Virginia consistently puts out a decent program. But I think the one thing is then you have 2 easy games against ETSU and UTEP, and then you have pretty much a schedule from hell with Florida, Georgia, Auburn, Alabama right there. Then you get South Carolina, a little bit more of a break, but that's still on the road. But then those last 4 games is where you're really going to need to shine because that's late in the season. That's when these guys have been in practice, been in the film room. They've gone through the tough part of the season, and now you get Charlotte, now you get Kentucky, now you get Missouri, and now you get Vanderbilt. These teams are okay, but nothing great. And I think that's the biggest thing for this team in Tennessee is you're not going up against great quarterbacks outside of Drew Lock in that Missouri game. You have the chance to possibly take all 4 of those games if you're able to take three of the 4 non-conference games in ETSU, UTEP, Charlotte. You get a 7-win season. You're going to a bowl, and this is a very successful season for Jeremy Pruitt. Well,
and the last thing we'll kind of do to close this up before we go into the next team is right at the end of, I'm looking at the Athlon Sports preview for Tennessee, and they're saying that, and here's the quote, Pruitt hopes that recipe is good enough to produce at least 6 wins in year 1. I look at that, and I know he had 4 last year, but I look at that goose egg in the conference, and at first sight I go, all right, maybe you're being a little bit too ambitious with 6 wins. But the more I think about it, we mentioned it. Eastern Tennessee, UTEP, Charlotte, those should be 3 wins. And the thing that'll be interesting is, you almost beat Florida last year. It was a 6-point game. However, that was a different Florida team.
That was at Florida, though.
And it was at Florida, but Dan Mullen being the head coach, I expect Florida to have a different attitude around him. Also,
you could say the same thing for Jeremy Pruitt.
And that's what I'm saying. That's the end of the season. More so, Mizzou, who's going to be at home, and Vanderbilt, because those were 2 games you got blown out, 50-17, 42-24. But let's be honest, Butch Jones wasn't boosting these guys with confidence.
I think it was gone at that point, too.
Exactly.
So, I mean, they had no coach. They didn't care.
This team, exactly what you said, did not care. I expect that to change this year, so those 2 games might be different. The third thing that I think needs to stay the same that it was last year, you came out game 1 last year, played a Georgia Tech team, a Power 5 team on a neutral site, punched them in the throat, won 42-41 in double overtime. You need to get a win like that week 1. You need to set, I'm not saying they will, I'm saying you need to set the statement week 1 and get a surprise on West Virginia if you want to set yourself up for a 6-win season, because then the only way you're getting to 6 wins this year, in my mind, is if you go 4-0 in non-conference, beat Mizzou, beat Vandy.
I think they can beat Kentucky. I think they can beat Kentucky. I think they can beat Mizzou. I think they could beat Vandy. They can go 3-4. They can get 6 wins. And maybe even South Carolina turns out to be an upset. I mean, I know that is in Columbia, but I still think that could possibly be a win because especially if you're coming off those 2 massive games, especially the Alabama game, and you finally go up against South Carolina, it's kind of like taking the donut off a baseball bat.
Yeah.
It's going to be a little bit lighter. It's going to be a little bit easier. So if you're able to go in there with some confidence, especially if that Alabama game's like close, if you lose by 10, I think that could possibly be a moral victory for this Tennessee team. And you go into South Carolina, you possibly get a win. I see possibly 8 wins for this Tennessee team. I'm going to pick 5 because I don't believe in them too much. I think that they're going to struggle out of the gates. I think tough games, especially to start off the SEC conference, is going to be bad. But I think the biggest thing is not really the wins again for Jeremy Pruitt. It's how this defense looks under Pruitt.
And the one thing that I do wonder, I have to look, I need to fact check myself before I go ahead and say it. I wonder if this could be a situation like we saw in Georgia, where year 1, pretty good season. We went like maybe 3-4 wins in conference, got about 6 to 8 wins, maybe more on the 6 side for Tennessee. And then the next year rolls around with my recruits, boom, we just shock everyone. I'm not saying national championship shock, because I don't think many people expected that from Georgia last year, but I wouldn't be surprised if next year Tennessee is yet again in the discussion of, wow, this is a team to watch to maybe be competitive in their side of the conference.
I think it'll take like 2 years before they're like, you know, near the top end of the SEC East, because again, we're looking at, you know, a loaded SEC East. Again, these teams are going to get better, like Georgia. Florida's going to get better under Dan Mullen. So I think these are teams that you got to watch out for. I think Tennessee, especially once Pruitt gets his recruiting classes in, I think, you know, probably 2 years, that's when we're going to look, when these guys are sophomores and these guys are fully invested into the Pruitt system. But I think, you know, Tennessee Vols fans should be excited. I know Pruitt wasn't a sexy hire like Lane Kiffin if he came back, or like a John Gruden, but I think Jeremy Pruitt is a guy.
Greg Schiano was hired, and they pushed him out.
But I think, especially with Jeremy Pruitt now, I think this is a guy that, again, has a lot on his resume, and even though he hasn't had that fully, you know, that head coach experience, being a part of that Alabama system and being the DC, and being a part of that Georgia system and being the DC is absolutely massive, and it's pretty much like a head coaching job in itself. And
I know the true reason why Vol fans didn't want Schiano there, but I guess one of the other reasons was they just didn't want to see any Schiano men in Knoxville for Greg Schiano to turn those Vols into. But if you're a Tennessee fan, let us know what you guys think down below in the comment section. What should we expect from your team on offense, defense? What do you think schedule-wise, win-losses? What are you expecting for this Tennessee team in year one of Jeremy Pruitt? Let us know what you think down below in the comment section.